Hey folks, Rob here bringing another video. This is going to be part 2 of probably 4 parts on North Africa, Chapter F in the book. I say 4 parts because I'm going to have to break part 3, I think, up into 2 more because the terrain's going to take one all by itself. And if I want to talk tactics, that's probably going to have to be its own video. So we'll get into that when we get into it. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to be looking at desert low visibility, what that entails. And we're going to be looking at dust itself. Now, dust is going to be its own thing. However, parts of the dust, the light, and the moderate actually falls under desert low visibility. Why? That's what MMP does. And we're just going to break it up into those components. So before we do that, let's look at some other articles. Now, I found a couple of new sources that I'm going to reference. So I'm just going to update what I said from the previous video. The first one I want to talk about is the Vernacular version of Chapter F, and that is on Texas ASL. It is a very much shortened version of Chapter F, written by Matt Romey. TexasASL.com. If you haven't seen the website before, links down below in the description. This is section 1 on open ground. Entrenching, 1 sentence, half a sentence, 1 sentence. All you need to know. All right, so he did that for every section of Chapter F. It is the bare bones version, and it is much simplified. So if you want Chapter F bare notes, that is the one to go. Secondly, on the ASL Facebook page, somebody asked, how can I get good at desert? Because I'm going to be getting into that. And a lot of people piped up with answers, one of which was Kurt Schilling. And he said in the next journal coming out soon is going to be his article on how to play in the desert. So this is an early version that he had posted on his Discord. However, he's going to, I guess, reformat it and he's going to submit it to the journal. And it's going to be published probably soon. I'm not sure when, maybe the first quarter. I really don't know. But coming soon in the ASL journal is going to be a programmed instruction on desert play. So there's that. And then lastly, issue 59 of Dispatches of the Bunker is supposed to be, I think, in March, Vic Provost said, according to the email I got, because I just subscribed to the next 4 issues. And it said at the end of this month. So it's going to be part 3 of Carl Noguera's 3-parter, and Tactics, and I believe Dust is going to be in that one. So a lot of good desert information is coming your way. This one here is available, so highly recommended you download that if you haven't already. And of course, there's always View from the Trenches, number 78. A couple years old now, but still good, including these 2 tables, which I'm heavily going to reference. Heat Haze and the Dust Summary. So definitely get your hands on those 2. All right, so let's get to it. And we're going to start off with desert low visibility. What does it entail? So there's 4 components. There's sun blindness, heat haze, light dust, and moderate dust. Now the bottom 2, light dust and moderate dust, kind of going to roll into the dust section as well. So we're going to cover those in a second. But let's start with sun blindness and heat haze. Before we do that, bear in mind that these are low visibility, therefore they're not hindrances. So when determining if LOS is blocked, remember there's that section on Chapter B, B10, where it says that if you have 6 or more hindrances, LOS is blocked. This is not to count. So none of these low visibility hindrances count towards that. Just bear that in mind. Now, secondly, when it comes to hip entrenchments, any hip entrenchment in concealment terrain is only revealed if the LOS to the enemy viewing it is within 6 hexes of it, and any concealment terrain that's more than 17 hexes away from any unbroken enemy ground unit is treated being LOS for concealment gain purposes. All right, so that's a bit of a wordy sentence, I have to admit. I'm trying to grok what it actually means, but just bear in mind it's harder to see things in the desert, especially when you're looking at the effects of sun blindness and gaining concealment gain, for example. If you're looking into the sun, it's going to be a lot easier to gain concealment than it would normally. So just bear that in mind. Speaking of sun blindness, so this is going to deal with 2 periods. So you're going to have early morning and you're going to have the late afternoon, basically sun rising and setting. LOS to a target is in the easterly direction, and you're going to look at the yellow shading in the two diagrams. You're looking at, and this is based on the orientation of the map boards, obviously. So the one here on the left, you're looking at the white dots for the center of the hex dot. If it's inside the shaded area, that means the entire hex is going to constitute being within the shaded area, even though physically it's not. And anything inside that hex is going to be suffering the +2 to sun blindness, which is a benefit to the unit in the hex, a detriment to the unit that's firing, because they're going to have to pay +2, which means it's going to cancel out the -2, moving and open for infantry. So you have a -2 FFMO and NAM. Meanwhile, you have a +2 from the sun blindness, so you have a net 0, which is just going to make it easier for your infantry moving and open to approach with the sun at their back. However, should a unit for some reason exit out of the sun zone into the non-sun zone, they're now going to be susceptible to the moving and open non-assault. So remember, you want to try and approach through the sun whenever possible for your attack. That's all that means. On the what you have to also be aware of is obstacles behind the target. So if I open up a, let me open up a Vassal map. All right, so here's good old Kasserine Pass, right? Let's assume that east is going to be towards the top, and west obviously will be to the bottom, north to the left. So here on board 25, we have a level 4 hill mass, and let's have an American unit approaching from the east, and we're going to have this Italian, just ignore the Craig for now in this location here, pretend it doesn't exist, and we're going to have an entrenched Italian sitting in this location. Right now, because there is a level 4 hill behind the American, the Italian will not be able to, the Italian will not be blinded by the sun, which means he'll be able to shoot this American with the -2 moving and open non-assault move. So the American will not be able to benefit from the sun blindness at his back. If, however, we assume that board 25 is not there, now the sun will be at the American's back. The Italian player will have to account for the +2, which will negate moving and open non-assault, and therefore it's going to be a flat modifier. Okay, again, assuming that the Craig isn't there, none of this other terrain here, assuming it's all open ground, it's going to be a flat shot for the Italian. That's all that second bullet means. If any obstacle is 2 or more levels higher than the target, and you go right to the edge of the plane area behind the target, then there's enough shade from that target that it's not going to backlight the target, not going to blind the shooter, is basically what they're saying. And this goes for the fire, spotter, and an offboard observer as well. As long as your fire, your spotter, and your observer are not 2 or more levels higher than the target, basically as long as you're not looking down at the target, then you're going to be impacted by the rising sun. All right, if you are looking down, if you're like a level 3 observer and the target is down here at level 0, then you're looking down and the sun's over here. Obviously, you're not going to be impacted by that light, and therefore you won't have to pay the penalty. So sun blindness is going to impact you with every TIA roll and every non-ordnance IFT. The exceptions here you can see: OBA, demo charges, flamethrowers, fire lanes, and specific collateral attacks are all going to suffer a +2 sun blindness DLV, diral modifier. And of course, neither the fire nor the target can be aerial to be affected. When it comes to late afternoon, you just flip the wording around so that replace easterly with westerly. All right, another thing to remember is with early morning sun blindness, when it's in effect, is that the EC are going to be automatically moist, early morning dew. Exception to that, of course, is if it's raining or if mud exists, in which case the EC are going to be wet when it rains and or mud, respectively. All right, looking at heat haze. Now, this only occurs in North Africa scenarios where you must have at least one desert board. The weather cannot be overcast, and or mud and overcast cannot exist. Now, this is specified by SSR or a time of day die roll with the design your own scenario. And if it's in effect, the desert low visibility hindrance die roll modifier applies at those ranges you can see on that chart. Again, this is from View from the Trenches, number 78 on page 15. And it applies to every to hit die roll and non-ordnance IFT die roll. Exceptions are there, OBA, fire lane, etc. And you can see the modifiers. So for heat haze, infantry, 0 to 12 is 0, and then increments of 6. For vehicle, 0 to 24 is 0, then increments of 12. And then for intense heat haze, it starts to drop down from there. Now remember, these are low visibility modifiers. These are not hindrances, so they do not stack, they do not prevent block lines of sight. They just are low visibility hindrances. When it comes to air attacks and ground support, first of all, you're going to be getting a +1 to your sighting task check for both types of heat haze. And when it comes to ground support attack itself, heat haze will give you a +1, and intense will give you a +2 for the actual attack itself. Interestingly, when it comes to shooting on the area target type, you actually get a benefit that if you have mixed targets, so if you have vehicles mixed with infantry, for example, a tank and a entrenched infantry, say at 20 hex range, you would get to use the best die roll modifier. So in this case, it would be a vehicle at 20 hex range would be a +0, as opposed to the infantry would be a +2. So you get to use the best case. On the other hand, if you're firing smoke or you want to spec fire HE in a blank hex for whatever reason, you would be using the infantry column for the die roll modifier. So again, if you want to fire smoke at 20 hex range, you would have a +2 heat haze modifier to your attack. Now, this also applies to offboard observers for OBA. Again, your accuracy is going to be crap anyways, because most offboard observers have a +1 for your accuracy. So you're rarely going to be accurate with that anyways. And this should not be affecting pre-registered fire. That's typically always going to be a 4 or less. So let's go on to dust. And this is going to start to meld into the dust section of it anyways. So we're just going to cover this all at once. And again, this table is from View from the Trenches, number 78, where it's a nice handy table and it melds everything together. So with dust, you need to have EC dry or very dry, and you need at least one desert map board. Now, there are two other kinds of terrain types that are special. There are step terrain and broken ground, which I'm not going to cover. We'll get to that when we deal with the terrain. So this might be a bit different for that. So for desert map boards with one or more, you need to have dry or very dry conditions. For heavy dust to exist, you must have all desert boards. And again, heavy dust includes extremely and very heavy as well. Usually it's by design your own or SSR, or you could have specific occurrence in place. So when you have a bombardment, for example, an SSR could specify you have 1, 2, or 3 turns maybe of dust that exists, and then it ceases. Or vehicles could generate dust, or FFEs, OBAs could generate dust, etc. Dust is broken down basically into 5 levels. You have light and moderate, which constitute desert low visibility. And you have heavy, very heavy, and extremely heavy, which are actual dust itself. That's the actual dense dust, and then you have your desert low visibility dust. The actual 3 levels of dense dust are LOS hindrances. They will negate FFMO and interdiction, whereas your desert low visibility, your light and moderate, do not. Now, your light and moderate will give you a interdiction die roll modifier in terms of you roll a single die, you have it. For light, you round down, and for moderate, you round up. and you add it as a negative modifier. So for light dust, you would roll a single die, and you could get either a 0, -1, 2, or 3, and which you add to your interdiction morale check. And for moderate, you would add a -1, 2, or 3 to your interdiction morale check. So you have a good chance of making your roll. And if you do your normal, let's do a actually let's bring up a map and we'll do a roll. You might understand it a bit better that way. So again, we're going to use Kasserine Pass. Yeah, let's get rid of some dust, smoke, I should say. Let's get rid of all this. All right, so we're going to use our little trusty 88 here in the corner. On Malfit, we're going to fire at this American in a foxhole. Let's see how far away we are. All right, so we are 16 hexes away, and we are going to use light dust in effect. All right, so we are 16 hexes away, which means we need a base 6. And we have an L weapon, which means we're going to bring it up to a base 7. With the TM of a foxhole, we're going to have a 5 or less. And we need to roll our dust. So we're going to roll this. We're going to have it, and we are going to round down. So it's going to be 1.5, rounded down to a 1, to which we add 9. So we missed with a 10. And let's assume that we rolled rate, and we still missed, so we're going to fire again. Now, because of the rule, we have to roll this die every time we take a shot. So we don't get to use that one again. We have to roll another one. So this time we rolled a 3. Remember, we're rounding down. And we do another die roll. This time we rolled a 6. So we rolled a 9. With acquisition, brings it down to an 8, but we needed a 5 or less to hit. So yes, we've acquired twice, but we still have missed. And if we wanted to keep firing again, we would have to do another one. This time we rolled a 1, to which we add our 5. So now we rolled a 6. We have acquisition for twice, which brings us down to a 4. So we finally hit on our third shot. But you can see that out of 3 shots, we rolled a 1, we rolled a 3, and then we rolled a 1 again for desert low visibility with our hindrance modifier. And that's for light dust. If we had one of the heavier, denser dust, say we had heavy dust, we would have to include the range in hexes. So here we start to add hindrances. Now we're talking 16 hexes, right? So first of all, I would not be able to see it because remember, the most we can do is, according to the chapter B10, is +6 or more blocks LOS completely. So very heavy dust heavy dust would be half the range in hexes. So that would be a +8. The best we can get is a +5. So I can fire at anything 10 hexes or less, right? So I would not even be able to see those Americans in that hex. And that doesn't even count the half rounded down desert low visibility die roll that I would have to roll. So you can quickly see the density of the desert, of the dust, how quickly it gets ridiculous. I'm not even talking all the rest of it that we're going to cover in a second here. All right. Before we get into the bottom pointer, let's talk about the actual heavy dust itself. So heavy dust negates FFMO and interdiction, as we said. To that, we also add +1 movement point per vehicle, per hex. Now, when you're talking moving in convoy, platoon movement, you already are paying extra move, not to mention impulse, what have you. When you add in very heavy dust and you're buttoned up AIV, you're now adding more movement, so now you're adding another +2. Convoy movement, for example, you would be paying additional +1, so now your total is +5 per hex. So you can quickly see how slowly you're moving. Infantry, you're not allowed to double time. You're not allowed to charge as cavalry. Your breakdown is lowered by 1. Your X number is lowered by 1. So if you have circled breakdown numbers on your martyrs, for example, your weaponry is going to become that much more fragile the heavier and denser the dust is. The heavier your dust is, the less tenable your battle's going to be. All right, so just remember it's generally crappier. As I've said, I have never played with any of these dust levels, and to be honest, it would probably ruin my gaming experience if I did, because it's hard enough to play against a competent player with troops, let alone the weather. It's not something I would find enjoyable, I don't think. But everybody has their own thing. All right, which brings us to the last bullet down there at the bottom, and that is the cumulative effect of dust. So we have vehicle dust and we have FFE dust here. These are in addition to these other 5. This can all be cumulative. So you could have vehicle dust inside an FFE, inside one of these other 5. You could have other effects as well that will quickly make it impossible to see things, let alone shoot at things. And let's get into some of that stuff right now. Vehicle dust. All right, so vehicle dust can occur whenever light dust is in effect. And when we say light dust in effect, we also mean moderate. And when we say heavy dust in effect, we also mean very heavy and extremely heavy. So anytime any one of those is mentioned, just remember that the other ones are in effect as well. Just for ease of space, they don't mention them all. Anytime a vehicle enters a new hex at a cost of 2 or less movement points, a vehicle dust counter is placed at the base level of the hex exited. And the exceptions to this is if you've just expended a start MP and moved into a new hex, you do not place one in the hex you just left. If you've exited a hex via a paved road hex side, if you've exited the playing area, if you're using armored assault, if you're using, if there's heavy winds and gust in play, for example, that always negates dust, those kinds of things. Timing wise, you remember that you always do your move, then you place your dust, and then you do any defensive fire and or bounding first fire in that sequence. And the same goes with platoon movement, impulse movement, any of that convoy movement. You'd always do that first. You put your dust down, and then you do any defensive fire, bounding first fire. That sequence is quite clear on that. Now, the counters themselves are always removed when the following happens. All right, whenever the vehicle leaves its present hex, whenever a wind change die roll results in heavy winds, gusts, or rain, whenever the vehicle begins the next friendly prep fire phase not in motion, or it begins its next movement phase already in motion, and then expends a movement point for any reason, change covered arc, what have you. It's always treated as normal drifting dispersed smoke, and therefore is a level 2 +2 hindrance, rather than any type of desert low visibility. Now, remember that you can always choose to expend more MPs to enter a hex than it would normally cost. So the reason why you might want to do that is, if we go back to our Kasserine Pass example, say we have our Italian tanks here. So I'll make them immobilized. And say we want to create a screen for our Italians down here so they can move. Normally, you would just move normally, and you'd put your dust counters will follow you around as you're moving, and thereby creating that mobile dust screen behind you, right? But for whatever reason, let's say you don't want to do that. If you want to pay 5 moves to enter this hex, you're paying more than 2 per hex, then you do not create the smoke screen. You could pay 5 here, you could pay 5 here. Again, just ignore the terrain that's in the map. Pretend it's all open ground. You pay another 5 here if you had the move, for example. As long as you expend more than 2 MP per hex, you're not creating smoke in that, or I should say dust in that location. You can always use up all your move if you want entering a location. But as long as you're not expending 2 movement points entering a location, you will not generate any dust. So just remember that. Should you enter a location and you create your dust and you get destroyed, the dust will stay there even though you may be destroyed. But it will be removed in the subsequent prep fire phase unless, of course, something else happens in the interim. Say, for example, the next wind change turns into rain. This will be gone, etc. Okay. On the reverse side of the counter, let's bring our tank back. If you want to stay in motion, you can just take your dust counter and flip it over. There is a motion dust counter, so you don't have to double stack it and use a motion counter in addition to that too. So it just helps with counter stack. You don't have to have multiple counters on as well. And as I said, if we had multiple vehicles, say we have a couple of tanks, all nice little chain. The way you would normally do this is you move in an impulse, right? You place your smoke down, then you conduct any defensive first fire, bounding fire. All right, then you do your second impulse, you place your smoke down, you do any defensive first fire, any bounding fire, and so forth. All right, you always do it in that order. You move your impulse, you place any dust and smoke, you do your defensive first fire and your bounding first fire attacks. Always in that order. All right, so let's look at some other dust stuff. Now, FFE creates their own issues. Normally, an FFE concentration, you have your 7 hexes. You get a +1 line of sight hindrance for the entire FFE. With dust rules in effect, you're going to get +1 per hex. So you're going to each hex is going to get its own +1. And with harassing fire, typically you have no hindrance modifier. With dust in effect, you're going to get a +1 for the entire template. With a barrage, you're going to get a +1 per hex. And a creeping barrage, you're going to get a +2 per hex, in addition to the normal +1 for the smoke that you get as well. Wind force gusts have no effect versus the FFE dust. So while you may affect your smoke drifting, if you have any, you're not going to change the FFE dust at all. You're still always going to have that regardless of that. Now, when it comes to the wind change die roll and the intensity and density of dust, that will change based on the strength of the wind. If you have heavy winds and gust in effect, your dust density will increase 1 level. And if both conditions are in effect for successive player turns, the increase will be cumulative per player turns as well. And if it continues, or if the winds cease, if the heavy winds gusts cease for a turn, then the corresponding dust level will drop a level. So your dust level density could increase and decrease according to whatever wind change die roll that you do. And then finally, any attack that you do upwind, so into the -1 region of the wind direction counter, will incur an extra +1 desert low visibility modifier. Some miscellaneous dust rules then we have to worry about are your accuracy for OBA will be impacted by your desert low visibility modifier. So again, that die roll D6 have rounded up or down will be applied to your accuracy die roll. So most accuracies will be off, and that also goes for offboard as well. The exception to that is sun blindness, heavy winds, and dust are going to be NA for LOS from an observation plane. And in a building, any desert low visibility, vehicle FFE dust are always going to be NA. if you have LOS within the same building. Now, you don't have the really large factories and buildings like you do in European theater, but there might be the odd one that crops up. And in that case, you won't have to worry about dust playing a part. It's just when you have those large buildings that you won't be impacted by it. When it comes to siting task checks, aerial LOS will be impacted. You're going to get an extra +1. It's already hard enough to get a siting task check. Now you have to add in dust as well, and it will impact you when you make your actual air support attack. Again, you're going to have to do that light or moderate dust roll when you do your attack. So the exceptions, of course, are aerial dogfighting and your heavy AA. They will not be impacted by the dust roll, obviously. Residual, remember, it has no memory, so it's never going to be impacted by the dust, nor will a fire lane. Close combat, it will not be impacted whatsoever. Heavy dust and the extreme and very heavy dust will cancel FFMO. However, they will not have any other effects. So they're still going to be there. They're not going to be reduced any. They're just going to be no FFMO in the attack. All right, so we're almost done. Rain. Rain is always going to cease any dust effects for the rest of the scenario. You're never going to have dust again. Yay. And then mud in any arid land. Again, arid land for purposes of ASL are anything Mediterranean. So here we're talking, Sicily, parts of Sicily, I should say, Mediterranean islands, North Africa, the Horn of Africa, those kinds of places, you know what I mean, Middle East. Using only desert boards, you use bog as per normal. So if you've never used the bog rules in Chapter D, basically what happens is, and this only applies for open ground that's accessible to Hamada, your opponent rolls the bog die roll, and he rolls the third die, where is the number of hexes. So if that secret die roll is a bog, and there's certain dice that will apply, then the number on that third die is the number of hexes that you travel before you actually bog. So if you bog, you have no idea how far you're going to make it before your vehicle gets stuck. Should you be stuck, you use normal bog rules to unstick. And yeah, when it comes to illumination, clearly dust is going to impact things. You can see its effect. Light and moderate is not too bad. It's pretty similar to normal. It's when you get into the denser dust, like moderate and heavy, or excuse me, heavy and very heavy, that it's really impacted. And of course, extremely heavy, it's useless except for blazes, and that's only its own location. IR and star shells don't even work in extremely heavy dust. And you can see that it's almost useless to have a scenario in extremely heavy dust. So that's about it. I think I covered everything. Yeah, so that's desert low visibility and dust. Not too bad. I think that took about a half hour or so. Hopefully I was of interest and I covered everything, I think. Let me know if I made any mistakes. I'll do errata in part 3. As I said, I think I'm going to break part 3 up into 2 videos because tactics might have to be its own depending on how long waddies take. Waddies is a lot of material to cover because there's so many variables that have to be factored in. A lot of material to cover in that thing. Yeah, so let me know what you think. I appreciate your guys' views and your thoughts. So by all means, fill up the comment section. Look at these articles that I have up there and click on those links and start downloading them and look forward for the journal. Get those dispatches and view from the trenches. And make sure you donate some money for you from the trenches. The buddy could always use the help. And very handy article, and those tables. I love those tables. I'm going to start subscribing to them myself. And we'll see you guys next video. Bye-bye.